Well, hey there, YouTube. Petey Twofinger here. Very excited news. Mr. Bungle is an experimental rock band from San Francisco, California, reuniting, playing their first shows after 20 years of complete silence. Mr. Bungle, primarily Mike Patton, Trevor Dunn, Trey. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. Uh, Danny Heifetz, uh, Theo Langle, Bar McKinnon, and many others. Can't we forget the percussionist William Winnant? The names of the people who've recorded with Mr. Bungle. It's quite a few people, I would say. But the core of it goes back to these three guys. It's a bass player, a guitar player, and an incredibly gifted, like talent, like born with extra vocal cords guy named Mike Patton, who was the singer for Faith No More. He was like a Renaissance man around Y2K. He was the hardest working man in show business with all kinds of side projects and little bands that he was putting together and touring and running his own label called Ipecac Records. So if you're not familiar with Mike Patton, you've been under a rock. The thing about Bungle is it was challenging music. It was insanity music, like my wife would say. At some points, it would get really out of control. And the really cool thing about what they're doing, they're coming back to play their 1986 demo, which is something called The Raging Wrath of the Easter Bunny, which I was never able to really fully absorb that because I had become kind of a snob about fidelity. And it's a cassette recording. It's done with 4-track bouncing cassettes down, so there's a real lot of hiss. The production is awful on The Raging Wrath of the Easter Bunny. You can go ahead and listen to that if you'd like. It's on YouTube. That's their demo from 1986 when they. Mr. Bungle was a band that went through a lot of phases, and every album was different. The first album is demented circus, jazz, thrash, funk, acid trip, genre hopping, with a lot of Blue Velvet samples, video game samples, and field recordings, imaginative stuff. There's a Kentucky Fried Chicken commercial on the album. But it's incredibly entertaining once you can get past the vulgarity of it, the sophomoric perversion in the lyrics about masturbation and pornography. The first time I ever heard about Mr. Bungle was through a music club where you would pay them a one-time fee and then you would get to pick 10 discs off of a huge thing, a list of music. And I did that and got my, I didn't do it for long. I got the minimum of whatever it was because I quickly realized that I wasn't a fan of that music, any of that music that was on that. So I got anything that was cool, that was available through WMG or whatever it was called, I got. And Mr. Bungle was one of those CDs. I got it, and I remember putting it on, and I kept turning it up. I heard a little something, turned it up more, and then this chord, moments later, the CD starts off with a long period of silence, and there's a little bit of noise to make you think that you need to turn it up. And then they trick you into turning it up, and then this chord comes out, blows your speakers. So they were never they were never unimaginative. They put a lot of thought and a lot of effort into what seems to be just cacophony of chaos. Mr. Bungle's music was very detailed and very well thought out, and just on that level of excellence that you would expect from somebody on a major label who had been around for a long career. Like, what you don't normally see, this level of the amount of effort that they put in on these recordings was exceptional. Like, really, really something else. And although they only have 3 real albums on Warner Brothers Records, all 3 of them are very different, and they did change gears, and they did. It's tough to say that they improved, because it's like the first album was incredibly dense. It was like nothing I've ever heard before. The production of it is incredible. The mixing, the mastering, just the way it sounds, there's so much going on that it's just a complete nightmare. If you were to put this in for people who, like normies, they're going to like fire in their ears. They're going to do everything they can to make it known that they want you to stop that. The second album is more stripped down, but it's also more focused, and it has a more rewarding type of. It's more sublime, and it takes longer for the songs to hit you, and therefore it seems more like a puzzle that's more rewarding. And it's kind of all over the place too. Still, it has its themes, but. And then the third album is like incredible production again, where they really went out of their way to just knock it out of the park and make an epic type of a production, where it was 3 48-track tape machines synced analog. This is the last great analog album ever recorded in the world. It's called Mr. Bungle, California. And now that was supposed to be called Californication, but the Chili Peppers have a long-running feud with the vocalist Mike Patton. That didn't work out. So we have the California album, is their third and last album. That came out in 1999, and they toured like a world tour for that, and then they came back around on a festival tour called Snowcore, which was a winter tour with bands like System of a Down, Incubus, Puya, and others. And that was the only time that I was able to catch Mr. Bungle live was on the Snowcore tour, and it was incredible. It was incredible. That stage setup. They had so much MIDI and samplers and sequencers. It was a real complicated thing. So they kind of they had a while. It was a while to get them set up. So the crowd got a little rowdy. But eventually, what they did perform was really. It was great just to see the core of the band being Mike Patton, Trey, and Trevor Dunn, as well as, it's Danny Hefis, it's the Mr. Bungle drummer, but it's those 3 guys that are the main personality of the band that you're going to be seeing, and those are the 3 guys that are coming back for the reunion. The horn players are gone, the drummer's gone. In replacement, we're seeing Mike Patton has been in a band with Dave Lombardo, the drummer. He's been in 2 bands with him. One being Phantomas, and the other being, more recently, Dead Cross. Now, Phantomas is my second favorite Mike Patton project, and it's so hard to say that. Like, I would say it's Bungle, and then Phantomas, then Faith No More, then Tomahawk. But you could easily just as easily shuffle those up depending on what is the last release from him, because they're immediately going to go to the top of the charts when he puts something out. And Mike's music tends to present a bit of a challenge at first, and then you will be able to absorb it, and then it has a good staying power. Some of his music, the more challenging stuff, will be difficult for you to groove on it, for you to appreciate it. It'll take some time. It's challenging, but then those are the albums that I've found have the longest staying power in my catalog, where I'll be listening to them for a very long time. And that's how it was with the first album. I didn't like it at first, and I couldn't get over the vocals. It's kind of obnoxious, you know. And then there's an album, Faith No More, the second album, Angel Dust, that was a sleeper album. But the main sleeper album was the Disco Volante. That's the middle Mr. Bungle album, where they're just like, in order to be a Mr. Bungle fan, you have to work for it. They're not on MTV. They're not, this is pre-internet, so it passed me by, and I didn't get it when it came out. And then when I got it, it took a long time for it to hit me. And when it hit me like a freight train. So the great news is, that's my history with Mr. Bungle. I've done a video on Mr. Bungle before. For a few years back, there was a lot of Mr. Bungle reaction videos, and I did a video on that. And I talked about my love for Mr. Bungle. So if you like to hear me talking about this band, go back and check out my petey Twofinger reacts to Mr. Bungle reaction videos. It's better than this, I can tell you that. I remember I did a great job of it. Now, the news today is they're back, and I'm going to read from Blabbermouth. Mr. Bungle will be performing their Raging Wrath of the Easter Bunny, Eureka Band's 1986 self-produced, self-released demo in a trio of early 2020 shows. February 7th at the Fonda Theater in Los Angeles, February 8th at the Warfield Theater in San Francisco, California, and February 10th at Brooklyn Steel in New York City. The dates mark both the first time that Mr. Bungle has performed in close to 20 years and the first time that these songs have been played live in over 30 years. So it's original Mr. Bungle members Trevor Dunn, Mike Patton, and Trey will be joined by Scott Ian, Goatee, Jewboy, Anthrax, and SOD. SOD they're funny. I like those guys. And then Dave Lombardo of Dead Cross. That's Mike Patton's post-hardcore band with one of the guys from The Locust. Interesting stuff. It's good. I really like that Dead Cross album. Dave Lombardo also plays for Slayer and Suicidal Tendencies, and they don't have Phantomus down. Dave Lombardo, Dead Cross, Slayer, and Suicidal Tendencies. What about Phantomus? Mike Patton's coolest band of all time. Gotta be. Well, next to Mr. Bungle. For what is sure to be one of the most talked about musical moments of 2020. This is it. It doesn't get any better than this. Mr. Bungle coming out of hibernation after 20 years to play a series of 3 concise shows, nailing down this mess that is 1986's their teenage demo tape. So they're going to do it right. It's going to be intense. This is going to be super heavy. This is thrash metal, death metal, speed metal like you've never heard. This is going to be incredible. It's the drummer from Slayer, the original Slayer drummer, Mr. Bungle, and then Scott Ian's in there for a second guitar. So hold on to your hats. This is going to be incredible. and we can only hope that it will be streamed or people will film it, that will be pro shot, and that there will be more Mr. Bungle coming because the world needs this band. They're my favorite band. Frank Zappa called their manager to tell them how much he loved their first album. And in an interview, he's quoted as saying they were the only someone asked Frank Zappa, what new bands do you listen to? And he said, the only new band that's out there that's worth half a shit is Mr. Bungle. So, need I say more? Anyway, wrapping that all around, Patton was this young guy, and that was his first band in high school. Those were his friends. And it just turned out that, like, the guitar player is a genius who can write orchestral scores. And he's into, like, mysticism and, like, is a genius. The guitar player. And this is normally the guy can't find his weed. No. And then you have Patton, the guy with the extra, the 6-octave vocal range. And then this Trevor Dunn character, the bass player, is just... What can you say about Trevor Dunn? Except for a woman's work as Trevor Dunn. But no, seriously, he's an incredibly talented bass player. So this was just really weird that they grew up in this little logging town and they had this similar interests, kind of picked on kids from the local high school that didn't fit in, that went on to create some of the most mind-bending, challenging, and rewarding music that the world has ever had to offer. Now, the interesting thing about it was they were known on an underground scene, and their demo tape ended up in the hands of another up-and-coming big deal group from the San Francisco Bay Area named Faith No More, when they got rid of their singer because he was a handful. And he had a reputation for having substance abuse issues, drinking. He fell asleep on stage at a record release for their second album. So they ended up hiring this kid, Mike Patton, who they brought him in. He wrote the lyrics in 2 weeks and put the vocals down for this new album that they had written under all this pressure. And that album blew up at the point when MTV was just the massive thing. The massive thing. In the early 90s. So Faith No More is on Warner Brothers. They are touring and dogging this Mike Patton kid out all over the world nonstop. This festivals and opening up for Ozzy and just this Guns N' Roses, like these massive tours. And that brought about all this attention to Mike Patton's high school band, Mr. Bungle. And so before anything else could happen, Warner Brothers grabbed them up and signed them, and they were given kind of carte blanche, but they were also ignored. Warner Brothers let them do whatever they wanted to do, but they didn't really promote them. So here you have this unbelievably talented and imaginative group of people that are completely outside of the mainstream, that are into world music, and just basically all types of music, including a lot of fringe stuff, and then like super heavy stuff. And it's not all. Mr. Bungle isn't all thrash. Trust me. It's the last album is like surf and doo-wop. It's very accessible, that California album. But just the idea that that's kind of the story on why that they were on a major label, and that you could like go into the mall, into like a Rose Records or a Tower Records and buy this, insane music that you would normally, is too weird for normal consumption, is what I'm saying. So they are that one secret band. If you've never listened to Mr. Bungle, I would encourage you to do so and stick with it. Put that album on religiously when you're working on something and put it on as background and keep it low. And after maybe about a year, it'll hit you. If you don't like it at first, because you probably won't, but once it hits you, it will change all sorts of things for you about the way that you look at music, because they're really an incredible band. So this is it. This is like the second coming of Jesus Christ. If you're a fan of music, this is it. Mr. Bungle coming back from the dead after 20 years to finally do the right thing. Raging Rat of the Easter Bunny Volume 2 is what it's called. And it's going to be really good. The original recording is 35 minutes. They were kind of modeling after Slayer, Rain and Blood. You're in, you're out. 38 minutes long. So theirs is 3 minutes shorter. I'm sure that they're going to pad that out. I'm sure the show will be worth it. I can't even imagine who they always have really wonderful opening acts. So my only hope is that I'm going to be able to see this in high definition. Somebody, of course, they're going to capture this. Of course they're going to capture it. Of course they will. There'll be a live DVD of this. Of course they will. So that's what I'm really excited about. I can only hope for more Mr. Bungle, because the way that the book closed on that band was really lame. Really lame. The album didn't really... Well, I can't say how well the album didn't really do. I think it did well for them. But people that know about that album are just hardcore Mike Patton or Mr. Bungle fans. And it's a shame that the radio hasn't left us room for anything a little bit more experimental. You know, I never heard any Mr. Bungle on the radio. So, it's a huge day. Anyway, you guys, I'm going to cut you loose because this video is getting too long. If you're a Mr. Bungle fan, let me know. I'm sure you already knew about this and you're probably thrilled. But I want to get this video uploaded, so I'm going to cut you guys loose. Peace.